So in this video, we're going to finish out the remaining rules that are left to be covered, and we're also going to spend quite a bit of time on the different field parameters. Um, the field parameters are very valuable to know because it just allows you to control everything that happens in the field. We'll also touch on just 2 or 3 more permissions. So what we're doing is kind of going back to the permissions every few videos until eventually we have them all covered. So let's go into functional testing. At the moment, this is a very basic block where you just put in a serial number and it has a rule where it has to be past visual inspection. For ease of doing this video, I'm going to remove some of these rules because it's just a bit easier to be entering data without having to have the correct data in place all the time. So I'm going to delete rules here, and now we just have a bare minimum serial number field. So supposing we needed a report on various types of a part, we'll say, that was coming through, and we got that information from the serial number. So what I'll do is first I'll enter data to show you what I mean. I'll delete first. So delete all data and admin my password. So SNJJ4S 938. So I'm just putting in random numbers here, so we won't worry yet about. So now I'll do a slightly different one. SNJJ5S. Okay. So supposing we needed to know, well, how many 5S's came in and how many 4S's came in. Supposing that's the only way we can identify between the 2 serial numbers, because maybe one represents one kind of product and the other represents another. What we'll do is we're going to create a new field, and it's going to be our product type. We'll just pretend that's what it is, and go to rules on the serial number. Well, what I'll do is I'll just open the data one more time, and I'll just check an example of one, and I'll copy it actually. And the rule is populate local field with part of this field. So the idea here is that what we're saying is we want to populate the product type with a part of the string in the serial number. So you were introduced to the variable character before, and we covered that when we were doing the specific format rule. This one must be certain format. So it's kind of the same concept, where a variable character is something that's kind of like a wildcard in the string. So I'm going to pick an ampersand sign and then the sample string. And let's just say we want the JJ5S part. We want to extract that from this string. So I can see there's 4 characters here. So I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3, 4. And the idea is that it will extract these 4 from whatever we put into the serial number. In this case, it actually doesn't matter what these are when we put them in, because we don't have the rule that it must be a certain format. This is just designed to say get the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th character from the string. We can also decide that if we get a result. So let's just say in this case the result is going to be JJ5S. We can say, well, that actually means part 1. And we can keep doing that comma separated. So what I'm going to do first is do it without that, and then I'll do it with it. So the local field to populate is product type and the submit rule. So now let's begin to enter data and hit return, and we have our JJ5S. I'm just putting in random, and there's a JJ5S. And JJ4S. So now we're collecting part of that string, and once we have that extracted, we now have this value on its own, and this is where the way we described our reports in the previous things, how you can get these values and count them. You can do whatever you want with them, really. It's after that, I guess it's down to the requirements of whatever system you're creating, where you might need that field, that rule. Sorry. So that's the populate part of this field. Supposing now we decided, well, for now we can only do the JJ4Ss. We can only functionally test them. Maybe later on in the day we want to functionally test the JJ5Ss, but for now we only want to do JJ4S. So I'm going to show you the next rule. So I'll create a field called a drop-down list field. We'll just call testing, and we'll say JJ4S and JJ5S. Submit. I'll move this to the top. I'm going to change the product type to a plain data field, and I'll explain to you why once we get going. I'm now going to add a rule to the product type. So we have a rule already which is saying populate the product type with part of the serial number. But let's say, well, actually the product type has to be the one we're trying to test. In this case, it has to be equal to whatever testing is. So what we have is must be equal to another field. So we're going to say, well, it has to be equal testing. And we'll do a custom response saying this serial number. No, I'll just say we are not testing this serial number at this time. So that rule is on the product type, that it must be equal testing. So now let's try again. Let's say we'll let it pass first. So let's do JJ4S, product type JJ4S. It's happy with that. Let's do another one. Again, we're happy. Now let's do the 5S. So let's say we're testing JJ4S, but we're going to see what happens when we do JJ5S. And it doesn't like that. We're not testing this serial number at the time. Again, I've touched on this before, but let's do it again. Let's use our keep data for next scan rule. And that is so we don't have to select which one we're testing every time. So let's say JJ4S. Hit return. Next one, JJ4S. So that way then someone is scanning, scanning, and scanning. and then there's a mistake, they pick up the wrong device and they hit this one and said, no, we're not testing this one. But then maybe they've moved on to the 5S, so they decide, right, actually this is correct. Let's move on to the 5S, and then we can carry on. So that's that's the must be equal to another field. We also have that in reverse, which is cannot be equal to another field. So I don't know if there's need to show that. It's literally the same thing in reverse. Let's just do it just for the sake of it. I'm gonna get rid of the must be equal rule, and I'll say cannot test. And let's just say for the product type rules cannot be equal another local field, cannot test. You cannot test this serial number at this time. So now let's do 5S. Yeah, sorry, that worked. So that was 5S, but it cannot be equal 4S. So that actually worked. I just confused myself for a second. Let's try 4S, and it said you cannot test this at the time. So that's both of those rules. The next rule I'll show you is related to similar to populate part of a field, but you can actually just populate the whole field. So let's just say part number we make this a drop down as well. We just say part 001, part 002. And I'll just create a field called selected part number. Now this use case isn't the best because you in this example you probably just say, well, why don't we just use the part number? But it's just for demonstration purposes. So rules on the part number, populate a local field with data from another local field. So when we say local, what we're referring to is this block. So local field to fetch, we're going to say part number. Local field to populate, selected part number. And then there's a bunch of options about what we're going to do when we get this. When we get this value, are we going to overwrite it completely? Are we going to add it to the end? Are we going to add it to the start? So we'll just start with a basic one. I'll just say yes, we're going to overwrite existing data. So that just completely writes the part number that we've selected, and it writes it to selected part number. I'll just go back to rules, and we might just edit this rule, and we'll see override existing data. We'll put it to no. So part one will be fine because there was no data here, but then let's say we try and change it, but it doesn't do anything because we've already decided, no, we're finished with that. You can't change it again. So there's a few more options. So that's yes and no. Ignore if this field is blank. So basically, sometimes the part number might be wiped as a result of being populated from elsewhere. And this instruction is to say, well, if the part number is of no value at all, if it's empty, don't do anything. These ones are a bit more advanced, and I guess probably very, very specific in their use case. I'll demo them here, and we'll be building modules, and we'll have more videos in the future that will make use of them. So this video will be just purely to demo. So append to data. So this basically means put it to the end of the field. So when we do part 1 and now we do part 2, it just appends it. So every time I change a field, it adds another. Like I'm saying, obviously that use case doesn't apply here, but we'll keep going anyway. So append to data with space is the same as what I just showed you, except this time it actually puts a space in between the two of them. This can be handy if we're like generating a sentence with a list or something, like some keywords. So as you can see, it's building a string. Append to data with a comma is the exact same as what I showed you, except it's a comma, so I won't go into that. And what I'll just show you here is prepend to data with space. So prepend is almost identical to append, except the idea is it gets inserted to the front of the value, not the end. So let's show you. I picked part 1, so that populates part 1, and now when I pick part 2, it's getting shoved in front of it. And it has the space because I picked the option with the space, and then I picked part 1 again. So in this particular example, there isn't really a use case, but we will start seeing them. So we've now covered all the rules, and you may have seen some other ones appear in this video that may or may not be on the system by the time you're looking at it, but there are some legacy ones which we will be removing, which are no longer used as we have much better versions of the same thing. And for that reason, I haven't covered them in this video. So the next thing I'm going to do is touch on some of the field parameters. So we've already touched on a few basic ones. For example, hide the label for this field. So there are plenty of other things. Field parameters are basically options for your field. Hiding and showing things, doing different things. The ones I touched on were things like the make this numeric, the hide the label, like I was showing. Conditional visibility, we touched on. And so what we're going to do now is just kind of keep going with a few more parameters. Some of the big ones is around the filtering, so we're not going to touch that. We'll dedicate its own video to that. But what I am going to show you is a conditional value. And the reason I'm in functional testing is because this is something that may appear in a sort of environment where you're testing devices or testing units or electronic units and stuff like that. But you might have other uses for it as well. Conditional value basically sets the result. It sets the value of a field based on a combination of other fields. So I'm going to do an example first. And the reason I'm in, like I was saying, the reason I'm in functional testing is because it's a nice example of where you would do something like this. So I'm going to make this full width and tidy things up a bit. Let's just remove some rules just to keep it a bit simple. For instance, we have the product type. I'll remove the testing. remove cannot test. And let's just remove this one. There's no need for this. And we go to rules. So just, I suppose, I'll quickly show you something here. This rule that was on part number was relying on the selected part number field, which I have now deleted. As a result of that, we can see there's a red error saying, well, this rule is no longer valid. It's using fields or blocks that no longer exist. We will be making improvements where it can completely prevent you from deleting fields that have rules depending on them. But likewise, this is a nice option too. So that dependence kind of feature we're going to do is going to be optional, because this is quite a popular way of doing it too, where people are happy to delete fields, but even though other rules are depending on them, they're happy to delete them, and basically they can decide for themselves what they want to do with this rule. It's useless at the moment because it's supposed to be populating the selected part number field, which is deleted, but that's fine. I'm just going to opt to delete this rule because I don't want it anymore. So let's move on to our conditional value. It's going to create another grid. Let's just say this particular serial number requires 3 tests. So we'll say test 1, and we'll just say pass and fail and submit. And I'll duplicate that. So like I was showing, you can just press duplicate, and if the field name, if the field label has a number in it, that number will increment. Now supposing we decide, well, this serial number doesn't pass until all 3 of these have passed. So let's do total pass fail. Well, we'll just say pass fail status, and we'll make this a plain data field, and we'll just give it a submit. So now we're going to apply our field, our conditional value. So I'll go into parameters, go past all the checkboxes, and we have conditional value. So what we're saying is, what is the result we want when we're happy with all the values we're expecting? Let's just say it's pass. Enter the result when all the fields don't meet their expected values. Fail. So what we're saying here is, if they don't all pass, then our result is fail. And the default value is the one that we haven't selected all the values here yet. We haven't selected all these options. So it's the one waiting for all results. So now it's a bit like the conditional visibility. Now we start adding our fields and the results they need to be. So I'm saying here, test 1 needs to be pass, test 2 needs to be pass, and test 3 needs to be pass. So just to recap, we're saying when all of these equal these values, we say pass. When they all don't equal the value, we say fail. If some of them equal the value but we're waiting, we say waiting for all results. So now we save criteria. And we go to the front end. And as you can see, there's nothing here at the moment. That's because nothing has even started yet. It may be a case that you kind of would like to start with the waiting. So we get to that in a second. What I'll do first is I'll show you. We're going to press pass. So now it's waiting for all results. Let's press fail, and it's still waiting because we're not finished yet. And let's press pass, and this is fail. Why? Because they're not all equal pass. And as I keep changing these, it'll stay on fail until they're all equal pass, and at that point it's a pass. So I'm just going to address that issue I mentioned there about wanting it to show that we're waiting straight away. So let's have a look here. It's quite a simple solution. Conditional value, as you can see, waiting for all results. I'm going to copy that and X out of that. I'm going to edit the plain data field and make that the default value. So now when I go to the front end, it just starts with waiting for all results. So now when I press fail, waiting for all results, pass, fail, and it's a fail. And all three are pass. So I'm going to do one more example. And let's just say, instead of a button for all three of them, or buttons, the third one has to be within certain values. So think of this like a test on your car, and certain values have to be met. They can only be in between. So at the moment they all have to equal pass, but I'm going to just complicate things a small bit, and I'll edit this field as test3, and I'll change it to an input field. And let's just say temperature would be a good one. So just say we're testing the unit and the temperature needs to be between 40 and 70. So now I'll close this and I'll go back to our pass fail status, and we go to our conditional value. So I'm going to remove this one, test3, and now we're going to say, well, temperature, tick for between between values. So here's the format. So we can say between 40 and it's comma separated 70, we'll say. So that's kind of the syntax for being able to check if we're between two values. In the future, we might improve the UX of this where you can just add them. But for now, it's you type in the word between with a colon and you have the two values. You shouldn't really have to do that because when you tick, it'll generate this for you. But let's look at it now. So we have to be between 40 and 70. So let's put in fail here, and now we'll put in pass, and we put in a temperature of 30, and that's fail, 38, fail, 39. But now when I put 40, we're pass. And now we'll do 50, pass, 60, pass, 68, 69, pass, and then once we go to 70 or 71, now we're fail. Once again, there are other ways to do this in Blocworx, using rules, using counters, math fields, all kind of things. So often there are several solutions to the one problem, but this is quite a handy out of the box way of just getting multiple conditions checked to give you a final output. Something that's in the conditional visibility, and also which we covered in the previous video, and also the conditional value, is the idea that it can be any value. So let's just say final test. I'm going to go to pass fail and conditional value. So at the moment we have 3 of these fields that need to be meeting it, but let's do a fourth. I would say final test, and is tick for any value. And this is another kind of syntax we have, which is basically Blockworks any word with this exact format. You shouldn't have to remember it because it'll just generate this for you. You just click add field. again, we are looking at improving some of these things. Now the idea is that, yes, all three of these need to pass their criteria, but it won't pass until this has some kind of value. So let's go back to the front end. I would say pass, pass. We'll put in 60, and it's still not happy until we put in something here. So that's the any value. And I won't give you an example here, but just as a recap, going back to the conditional visibility, which we covered in the previous video, that feature is also available there. Tick for any value. The reason I'm saying that now is because I will put in our assignment for this video a test that you have to do a conditional visibility where any value appears, shows a field. So finally, I'm going to look at two more permissions that would be added to a role. So we go into our admin in development. And this time we're going to go straight to the fact that you can add permissions directly to a user. So up until now, I've been showing you that you can add permissions to a specific role, like set permissions for this role. And that would mean that any user that has that role has the permissions. There are times when you don't want to use the role to control the permissions. So let's just say, well, actually, when I'm editing a user, I don't care about the role for a minute. I just want to give them permissions directly. So let's introduce a new concept, and it's related to restricting data. So I'm going to go back to our module and product returns, and we go back to our receiving. So what we'll do here is go to edit mode, and we'll scroll down to a section called user restricted data settings. So I'm going to keep this very simple for now. I'm just going to say only load logged in users data. So basically what this means is when I go to the front end, the only data I'm going to see is my own. And this is great for when you have different users, maybe they're adding their own timesheets or adding whatever, and they can only see their own data. In this case, we'll say receiving. So I'm logged in here as well in another browser as the typical employee that we'd set up. And as you can see, they can't see any information. So I'm going to start adding a few records. We'll just use this same shipment number, serial one. I can't remember, is there a rule? There is. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And as you can see, I can see these records. Just add one more. So this user, typical employee, can see two records. But let's go back to the other browser as an admin, and I'll refresh. And I can see all the records. And furthermore, when I press X, I can actually see the user who entered them. It's possible to hide this as well, but we'll do that in another video. Now, let's say, well, actually, the typical employee, they can actually see all the records. I'm going to go to admin. So I have a choice here, like I was explaining. Typical employee does have the demo role, and they have the operator role. But let's say we say to ourselves, well, look, I only want this user to have this permission to see all the data. I don't want everyone with this role. What I do is click View More and Manage User Permissions. These are all the existing ones. These appear as a result of the roles, and they also are, some of them are like open permissions that everybody has. But let's add a new one, and it's going to be is not included in data restrictions set on blocks. Click Update Profile, and as you can see, it said there, I'll just go back to it one more time. Typical employee is not included in data restrictions set on blocks. So now let's go back. I just want to make sure I did that for the typical employee. I did. Let's refresh as the typical employee, and they're no longer restricted. So there is another example of a typical permission. So we'll leave it at that for now, and we'll cover a few more permissions in our next video. Thanks very much. Bye bye.